Greetings.
Should I put a little more growl into it?
Okay, I came back to, we spent 48 hours making puppets.
Making and breaking hearts, Ellinger.
It's not that kind of podcast.
On a practical level, I have to remember what I was saying on a practical level.
We should have a safe word. Armageddon!
I guess we're maybe semi-proud of that.
Welcome to Hide and Create, your online writing workshop.
Welcome back to another episode of Hide and Create. My name is Jordan Ellinger. I'm here with my co-hosts, Diana Rowland, Moses Siregar, and Joshua Essoe. And today's show is about money. We are revealing closely held personal financial data that you won't find on the internet about how much writers really make. So as a disclaimer, at the start of this show, I just want to say that everybody here is at a different point in their writing career, right? Just because one of us might make more now than the others or less, it doesn't make their viewpoint any less valid. Money isn't the final arbiter of good writing or your craft. But just this we're going to talk a little bit about what our income is, where we make it, how it comes to us, and how we pay taxes and do write-offs and stuff. So, with that said, I am going to start with our traditionally published author, Diana Rowland. Okay.
I've been very upfront about money pretty much since I sold my first book, because I think it's important for people to know. My very first contract for Mark of the Demon and Blood of the Demon with Random House, Bantam. And it was a $20,000 advance for each book with world rights. Now, everyone's like, oh, wow, you just got $40,000, you can quit your day job. And I've discussed this in other episodes. Like, no, first off, you have to cut that in half because you have half going to taxes and your agent's commission. And then that's also spread out over 3 years. So the only reason I was able to quit my day job, like I said earlier, was because I have a very loving, understanding husband. Now, the first year was great. So I had that, I had a pretty good bump because I had, the way it's spread out with advances is you get a third on signing, a third on publication, and a third on delivery and acceptance of the manuscript. I got that totally out of order, but y'all get the idea. So my first year was pretty good. I think I made probably about $30,000. Of course, then I had to take my taxes out. That was 2008. 2009, I made a whopping total of $11,000 because I didn't have that big bump of the contract signage. Then I got some sub-rights starting to kick in, some foreign sales, that sort of stuff. 2010, I made around $40,000. 2011, it bumped up to about $60,000 because we started to get more foreign rights. Germany was very good to us, that sort of thing. Last year was my best year ever. I'm looking at my tax statement from my agent, $89,763.84.
Nice.
Okay, now, a big chunk of that was I signed a new contract with DAW for 7 books. That alone was $38,675. Actually, no. What's that? No, excuse me, that was $40,000 or something like that. Anyway, it was a big chunk of money.
What percentage of that was from foreign sales? I know that they own world rights, but is that subdivided?
Here, I'm going to lay it all out for you. Okay, I'm looking at my taxable gross on my my tax statement. Big chunk of that, about $40,000 of that was signing the contract for 4 more demon books and 3 more zombie books. I got paid for the publication of Sins of the Demon, and then the delivery and acceptance of Even White Trash Zombies Get the Blues. And that was $6,500 and $7,000 respectively. Then I got royalties from Random House for Blood of the Demon and Mark of the Demon, and that was about $5,000 there. I got paid for the publication of Even White Trash Zombies Get the Blues. That was $6,500. Then under here is the big chunk of money for that contract signing. Then I got a sub-license fee, which I'm thinking that's the French rights, $3,500. That may have been audio, actually. Then delivery and acceptance of Touch of the Demon, $7,000. And then a big chunk of money from Random House, royalties. That was about $8,000. then more sub-license, which is like more foreign rights, about 2,000 there. And somehow it all adds up to about 90,000. I had a really good year. I don't expect to reach that level again this coming year, mostly because most of it was a big chunk from signing a big contract. However, right now I'm about comfortably at about 50, 60,000 just from delivering acceptance, doing the 2 books a year. Royalties are kicking in, plus I get a nice little bump from sub rights, audio rights, foreign rights, that sort of stuff. So right now, I mean, yeah, I can make a living on my writing. First couple of years, not so much.
I was going to ask you, how much do you make off your auditory rights?
Oh, boy, I think that's in a separate little file, actually. I want to say it's about $1,500 per book that I get. Or maybe it's $1,250. I think $1,250. I'm sorry, I didn't have that in front of me.
Is there anything else that, like you did other posters, or do you make any money off any of that stuff? Or?
No. I mean, the cover art doesn't belong to me.
Yeah.
So that's, if Dan DeSantis wants to sell posters, that's him. No, pretty much the money I make is from selling my books. And, I mean, that's my income there.
All right. What kind of expenses have you incurred so far?
A lot of my expenses, my biggest expenses are travel, going to conventions or conferences or workshops. One of my expenses is an assistant. I have an assistant who comes in once a week, or once every other week or so. Probably about anywhere from $300 to $500 a month goes to paying her, and she makes my life easier and made me a beautiful little spreadsheet with all my expenses, which I'm now looking at. I also have hired on my own a continuity editor because the series have gotten so long. 6 books in on the Demon series, and I'm working on the 4th book on the Zombie series, and it's gotten to the point where I just can't keep track of everything. I paid her close to $4,000 last year because she did a lot of work for me. She's also become basically my first reader as I go. So there's travel, assistant, my continuity editor, and then things like shipping out books, mailing, equipment like computers, printers, that sort of stuff, convention fees, memberships like in SFWA, that sort of thing, and keeping track of food when I'm traveling, and anytime I have a meal with someone where we talk business, that goes into the expenses thing, and like expenses for the home office, furniture, like my desk and that sort of stuff. But total expenses last year were right about $15,000 all told.
What percentage of that is conventions?
Oh, big. That's probably about 2/3, I'd say. Well, no, about half. At half.
Yeah, so I mean that's important. Like, we are businesses; there are expenses and income, right?
Yeah. So there you
So we move on to, I think it's best if we just cover each individual participant, and then we can kind of move on to a group discussion. Is that cool?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Shall we move on to Moses?
So I've written one novel. It's been self-published. I think the glass half full here is that the book has grossed as much as a typical first advance. It's grossed over $5,000. And I also, however, spent money for editors and a little bit of help on my covers and advertising, things like that. So I've probably put about roughly half that amount in my pocket. I've stopped keeping like super close track on all that, but the numbers keep going up. So those numbers should be conservative at this point. So considering that I've written one novel, I have sold close to 9,000 copies of it, and all that good stuff. It's pretty good. Of course, obviously, I'm not paying the bills with it, and so I'm in those early years. Hopefully, as a writer, I do think people listen to the show that are hearing me as the indie author. I mean, remember the guy who was on before me, who was sitting in my chair, was David Dalglish, and he's sold. I don't know if he's hit millions of sales yet, but I think maybe he has. He's definitely in the hundreds of thousands many times over. And think about selling, hundreds of thousands of books and making, $2 a book on a $2.99, Kindle book. So, there you have someone making a lot of money as an indie author. And a lot of indie authors do that. I've written one novel. It is really hard to make a lot of money on one novel, especially as an indie, or as a traditionally published author, almost certainly too. So I do hope people listening to this won't go, "Oh, Diana is just made 90,000." as a traditionally published author, and as Moses guys made $5,000 as an indie author, I want to be, because actually, if you were starting today, I still think if you actually want to make money, the best route you could probably take would be to actually be an indie and write a lot of novels and write for a hungry audience, write well, market it well. I actually think that's probably the safest financial route to take if making money is the goal. Others may disagree, but that path offers you a direct route and really good royalties with the ebook market, and there's a whole lot of financial potential there. And there's so many indie authors who make so much money at this, and of course they are people who are writing many books, and that's not been my situation yet. My goal is to get to the point where I can write 2 novels a year that I'm really proud of, and continue to write in the series that I'm writing, and then move on and write in other series. And I feel like if I do that, I have at least a realistic shot of making a decent living at this, perhaps even a very good living, or not. There's really no guarantee in this, but that's kind of what my situation looks like. And to have written 1 novel and done that well is unusual. So I have actually done very well for someone who has written 1 novel as an indie. But really, the name of the game is writing series and continuing to write and continuing to produce. And that's where you have the potential to make actually really good money, because you can sell an ebook for $2.99 on Amazon and make over $2. If you sell it for $5, you make about 65% when it's all said and done, at Amazon. So that's close to $3.50 or something like that on a $5 book. So there's a huge market there if you work with it. Of course, things are always changing in publishing, including indie publishing. It changes at lightning speed, and therefore I have no idea if any of the things I'm saying today will be true tomorrow. But you're just going to have to wing it and hope that things stay relatively stable, which they won't. But maybe they'll actually improve. Maybe the conditions will actually improve because more people will be reading more ebooks, and ebooks will continue to grow. And the Amazon and Barnes & Noble won't cut the royalty rates, and maybe this will just keep growing. But it is becoming more competitive. It's becoming harder to succeed than it used to be. So that's a factor. And one other thing before I turn it back to someone else here is just, I remember listening to an episode of Writing Excuses, and I like those guys a lot. I've interviewed them. I think they're all amazing, inspiring, really cool people. They did an episode once about, if you were starting today, would you go traditional or indie and that kind of thing. The one point I disagreed with them on was that they're all pretty much saying traditional, but I thought their point of view was from someone who had started as a traditional author back in the golden days, the old days, when that was really the only option that you had. And so to be someone who started like when Diana started and has done well in traditional publishing, it's different to do it when she started versus today.
Right. I started 5 years ago before ebooks were really a thing. It took in about 2 years after I started. Yeah, it was. But yeah, I started when it was mass market paperback. That was.
Yeah, if I had started then, there's no way I would have been indie publishing. Now I started 4 years ago, but actually 4 and 5 years makes a difference there, because right when I was getting into it was right when the ebook thing was just starting to look viable. And actually when I first started, it wasn't even looking that viable. Then a year afterwards, it was starting to look real viable. So it was kind of borderline. It was like that. So if you're starting out today, I think you have a much harder choice. And to hear, people who started when things were traditional, that was the only game in town, and it was the smartest play. Now I think it's a lot more confusing and hard to know which way to go.
Yeah, so I think it's important also to note that, Diana has 15 novels or something, right? So
yeah, I'm really not representative of most midlist authors who've been in it the number of years I've been in it. I've had some really good success. I do 2 books a year, and I've had some nice contracts. And like I said, most of the money this last time was for a contract that I have just started on.
Yeah, so this show is definitely not about comparing people, right? It's just about talking about where they make their money and where their expenses are, which brings me to the next question, Moses. You mentioned expenses kind of in general, from editing and stuff. Were there any other expenses that you ran into?
I spent most of my expenses on editing and advertising. And the advertising, be careful with advertising. Most of it is awful. like you don't take out, a big ad in Locus or something. Although Locus is great, but that kind of advertising isn't quite as effective. The advertising that actually works with ebooks are sites that cater to ebook readers. Some of that advertising can be extremely effective. Sites like eReader News Today and BookBub and some other sites that are like that. But yeah, that's where I've spent most of my money, and I've spent more money investing in the project than most indie authors do. A lot of indie authors don't spend a whole lot on the editing, don't spend a whole lot on the cover. Maybe some of them don't advertise much, that kind of thing. But I just really wanted to make a really quality book the best I could and have it be equal to a traditionally published book, hopefully. So yeah, I spent money because I hired 3 editors and that was important to me. So, what
would you say was your most effective investment?
Again, the editing and the advertising.
Out of the two, pick one.
No way. Because without the editing, the book would suck. So you could say that's number one. That comes first in the pipeline. But after that, without some of the good advertising that I have done, the book would not have sold 9,000 copies. It's on track to sell about 10,000 in 2 years. And I would not have hit those numbers without some of the good advertising that I've done.
How about the cover? What was the process in that?
Wait, I have a quick question to interject here, just so that there's a frame of reference. What is the average for an author to consider themselves successful? How many copies of books should they sell in a year?
Well, if you're a traditionally published author, you get your first advance or your second advance for a novel. I think, you might sell, 3,000 or 4,000 copies if you're doing science fiction and fantasy? it's...
Well, no, generally your odds are to earn out, right? So if you're, the average advance is $5,000, you make about 85 cents on a paperback. You probably won't get hardcover distribution. So that's 6,000 copies is what you want to sell.
All right, and I've heard a typical experience is less than that. It's like 3,000 or 4,000 can be a more normal experience for a lot of first-time authors with, I don't know, an average-sized publisher, whatever that is. So
Do you want some of my numbers?
Well, go ahead.
I don't have all of them in front of me. I wouldn't even think about that. But I know that my Mark of the Demon, it opened its first week. It sold 2,000, and if you give me a few minutes, I can actually go on Random House. I think I've sold about 40,000 since it's been out.
Wow!
Just get it right now.
So again, not typical, but
yeah. But
it's about 5 years.
Yeah. Well, it came out. The first one came out in 2009.
Okay.
But in Touch of the Demon, when it came out, I had about 1,500 paperback sales first week and about 3,500 ebook sales. So
I know some Warhammer novels do 40,000 to 60,000 copies, like just a large number. But that's Warhammer. So
yeah,
overnight.
Well, they can do 20,000 in the first week if it's an anticipated book.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I've heard, much humbler numbers from other people. Actually a new author, you don't expect to earn out. You don't expect to, the publisher expects to lose money on the project overall because of all the investment that they put into you. That's just because they have a lot of expenses going into, producing a first book and
right.
all the editing and everything. So I don't know, as far as how many books, would be successful. It's hard. It really just depends on your goals and, are your goals financial? Are they, sort of long-term goals of expanding a readership?
Yeah, it's important to realize that your publisher is probably going to lose money on your first 3 books, right? That's why a lot of people say the most important novel that you write is your 4th, right? Or, because that you sell, is your 4th, because by that point the publisher expects to be turning a profit. So Moses, you're absolutely right to say that people often don't earn out their first novel advances, but they should be earning out their 3rd novel advance. And if they're not, they might not get that 4th novel. That's the hardest one because by then you're a known commodity.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually have my numbers if anyone's for my first 2 books because
Yes.
Random House has an author portal. Mark of the Demon has sold 24,434 mass market copies, 13,648 ebooks. Blood of the Demon sold 16,737 mass market and 11,251 ebooks. So that's in the past 3-4 years.
There we go.
Nice.
So, yeah.
All right, do we want to, Moses, do you have anything else to say, or do we want to move on to Joshua?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, let's move on to Joshua. Hit us with some numbers.
What?
So-
Oh, I'm sorry. I was too busy being fed grapes upon my luscious piles of cash. Mine, of course, my experience is a lot different than yours, than any of yours, because I don't do the exact same job. I'm an editor. I learned when I first started researching this position back in 2010 that the average for my field for a freelance science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction editor was between $25 and $45 an hour. Okay, so that is far different way to get paid than an author. So what I personally did was I decided to start at the bottom and work my way up. So I started at $25 an hour, and I had a special of $50 per hour for the first 15 hours. It felt like a little bit like those pizza ads, the circulars that you get. If you mention my website, get $15 an hour for the first 15. So I did that, and that worked out really well. That brought in business, because for that kind of price, people were willing to give me a shot. And since then, I've steadily worked my way up, and I'm now working at $35 an hour with a planned raise up to $40 an hour on June 1st. It sounds like a lot paying somebody $40 an hour, but what I've noticed is that the price per hour, it actually doesn't matter that much as long as my estimates stay within the author's budget. If that happens, everything's good. And the cool thing is that, when I started at $25 an hour back when, I was a lot slower than I am now. So I can get more work done in less time. I charge a little bit more. So I looked at my taxes. I got an extension. Yay, because I was just too busy to get to my taxes this year. And it turns out that I made about $32,000 in editing in 2012, editing full-time. That's about a third of my previous income. But the wonderful thing about the downturn for me is that I learned how to cut my expenses and my bills down substantially. So that same $32,000 that I made last year goes a lot farther than it did when I was doing real estate. Thank God I'm not doing real estate anymore. Were there any specific questions that you had about how my money works? Because it's pretty straightforward. I file a 1040. I pay estimated taxes quarterly.
How much money do you spend? Do you spend any money at all on kind of business-related expenses?
Mostly just equipment type stuff, like I'm going to need to get a new laptop battery soon because it doesn't last more than like 60 minutes because I'm on it constantly. But not really too much besides that. Business related, maybe going to workshops, the gas and the time, hotel bills, food, that kind of thing. That's really about it. I don't really have many expenses.
So I figure this is a good opportunity to plug your workshop.
All right.
Hit us with that, and if you can describe a little bit about the finances that go into that.
Okay, so this September, are holding a workshop going from Vancouver down to San Diego on the Holland America cruise ship. Go to www.caravelworkshops.org, and that'll give everybody the skinny.
So what kind of expenses have gone into planning that?
Well, biggest cost, of course, was paying for all of the authors to come in. It includes hotel, travel expenses, flights from wherever they are, transportation from the airport to the hotel, to the dock for the cruise ship, and then once we get to port in San Diego, paying for all that, getting them back home, as well as for Carrie and I, because we have to go as well. Not that we would probably pay to go on this thing, whether or not, but it is a nonprofit, so we're not going to be making money on this thing. We're just doing it because both of us have sort of the same kind of mission. We really want to promote new authors and help writers with their careers and things like this. So our prices are as low as we can possibly get them, while still being able to afford the authors and the cruise ship and pay for all the rooms and that kind of thing. We also have the expenses of getting whatever equipment we might need, such as like overheads and if there's a chalkboard. I think there's a roll-away chalkboard that we can get from the cruise ship. We'll need chalk and we'll need erasers or dry erase, all that kind of equipment.
Okay. All right. So I'll get it into my finances a little bit. So I worked part-time. I had a full-time day job last year, and so I made X amount from that. But I worked about 3 hours a day every day last year. I ended up with one novel, one novella, a bunch of short stories, and then editing services. So last year, I made about $16,000 US. The majority of that was from the novel and editing, but I didn't do badly on the short stories because it turns out tie-in work for short stories pays fairly well, 8 cents a word. So that's above pro rates. So this year, now that I'm working full time, in the last 2 months since I've begun working full time, I've made about $10,000. That is from writing, but also from I'm doing some contract work for my day job. So if we're thinking just writing income, in 1 month I've made about $4,000 from both editing and writing. So it's important to notice that like I'm a scrambler, right? Like I'll do anything kind of writing or editing related, and I'm trying to kind of build my career in both. Unlike Joshua, who does freelance editing, I generally work for publishers, often for properties that fold in well with my tie-in writing experience. I edit for a Canadian production company, Atomism, and I make a certain amount of money from them. I edit a couple of websites, the Writers of the Future, eHerald. I make money there, etc., etc. So for me, there isn't one big source of money. I don't make money from one publisher or from one property. I make money from everywhere. I had checks last year from 6 different publishers.
Wow.
Yeah, and so far in tie-ins, royalties aren't really a thing, right? Like you have for my first novel, the royalties I got was 7 to 9%. 9% if it sold over 40,000 copies, 7% on the first, 10,000 copies. But with most tie-ins, what they do is they don't like to pay royalties, so they print enough to earn out your advance. They print one less than it would take to earn out your advance, right? And they make money, but you have no chance of earning out any royalties. Now, this may not apply to any of the publishers that I work with, because I love all of my publishers, but I've heard that happens in tie-ins. As far as foreign sales go, right now the publisher for my first novel has not sold the foreign rights. They take care of it, and they pay a 35% cut to me. But obviously they only sell into markets where they sell whatever my work is tied into, right? If there's no Fireborn role-playing game in Germany, if they haven't translated their role-playing game, they're not going to sell my novel there, right? So it doesn't even make sense for me to try to sell that on my own, even if I could. So this year I anticipate making about 40 to 60,000 from writing and editing, and that's just based on what's happening this year. But again, it's so up in the air with tie-in writing. It's not, you can't expect, it's feast or famine, right? I have a lot of pitches out. If those pitches hit, I'll make a lot of money. If they don't hit, I'll make not very much money at all. Does anybody have any questions for me?
So the breakdown, like what you might make this year, writing versus editing, is
probably this year, probably about 20,000 in editing and 40,000 from fiction.
Nice. So,
yeah, I also edit a magazine, Everyday Publishing. We just had a Kickstarter for an anthology, Ray Gun Chronicles. The Kickstarter we didn't make any money off it. That basically covers the cost of paying all the authors and paying our editor, Brian Thomas Schmidt, and producing the actual book. But if there is some profit, whatever doesn't get invested back into the publishing company, we might get a small amount for our time. So, you can just kind of make money from basically everywhere. I have a webcomic that's coming out and stuff, so some advertising fees. Any other questions? No.
Crickets.
As far as my expenses go, I have a corporation, Eagle Ridge Entertainment Ltd., and they are the ones, that corporation, which is just me, gets paid for everything, and that does a couple of things. That protects me against getting sued, so I'm not going to lose my house if something that I write accidentally libels somebody. or causes some damage because of my public persona or any number of things. But it also allows me to pay less in taxes. Corporate tax rates in Canada are about 18%, and then you're only taxed personal income tax on whatever you withdraw from the corporation. The idea being that you'll be in a lower pay rate because you're withdrawing less from the corporation. The corporation can charge, it can lease you a car, so you don't have to worry about that. It can pay a portion of your mortgage, your house, etc., etc., etc. So it makes a lot of financial sense once you start making a certain amount to go ahead and form a corporation. It cost me about $400 to set up, and your records have to be a little bit more elaborate, but you can get away with paying a lot less taxes quite legally. As far as money to be made, I think that some of us have been throwing around larger numbers and some of us have been throwing around smaller numbers, but nobody's throwing around like huge six-figure salaries. I think it's really important to realize Diana and I are members of SEFWA, and part of that they send you the figures on the organization, and it's important to realize that SEFWA only has 1,400 members, right? And of those, right, 1,400 members total across the world. I'm a Canadian. I'm a member of SEFWA. There's Australians that are members. So everywhere in the world, 1,400 members, right? It's quite a small organization. Many of those
really
members,
surprising, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Many of those members don't work anymore. They've been grandfathered in, or they have lifetime memberships, or they're retired, or they're associations, right? They're publishers that are members. Or they could just be rookie authors that have got in with 3 professional sales of their short work.
A great portion of them, I think, are that. I'd say probably about half of them, at least.
Exactly. I think the estimate is that there's about 300 working science fiction writers or something.
That sounds about right.
Across the world that are a part of SEFWA. So it's just a very small number of people that are able to make, even the numbers that kind of we have from writing. It's very difficult to make money. You hear about superstars like J.K. Rowling and Stephanie Meyer, but that's the equivalent of hearing people that have won the lottery.
But also, I don't want people listening to this to think that if you're not writing full-time, then you're not a successful writer. I mean, I look at Shauna McGuire. Shauna McGuire, I don't think anyone can argue that she's not successful. I mean, she kicks ass. She sells a ton of books, both as Shauna McGuire and as Mira Grant. She's nominated for Hugos all over the place, and she still has her day job. She has her day job because she needs to maintain health insurance for herself and for family members, and because of what we've talked about, it's not necessarily a steady income. Like I said, this past year, I had a good year. Next year's not going to be that good. I just know it, unless someone suddenly decides to buy more books from me or, buy a movie rights or something like that. So, please don't get into the a mindset that if you still have a day job, you're not a real good, successful writer. So.
No. I mean, and it is possible to earn money as a writer, earn a living. Diana's a full-time writer, right? I mean, everybody here is full-time, right, in one capacity or another, right? And we're not eating cat food.
Well, I definitely still have a day job. I work, do other things. My wife works and does other things.
Another good point is that many of us have spouses that have reliable income that they can cover us when we go for periods. It seems like sometimes the last person to get paid in any project is the writer, right? So our income is sporadic. Sometimes we'll get a massive check and it's feast or famine. So, I think many of us have spouses that are able to cover us and have that kind of solid paycheck so that we have money to get by even in the famine period.
Yeah, and things like insurance too. Although when I first started writing full time, I had private insurance, and we bought private insurance for my daughter and stepdaughter, and private insurance for me. So that was about $800 a month of expense just for that. Now my husband's insurance is situated where we have it through him, but it's still about $800 a month. It's just better insurance through him. Through his job.
We have socialized medicine up here too, but you do.
Don't rub it in. Don't rub it in.
Well, no, I'm saying, but you do have to pay for prescription drugs often. So I'm on my wife's benefit, but there are benefits. I'm on my wife's benefit plan right now. So there you go. Does anybody else have any final thoughts on the finances episode?
David Dalglish, who used to be sitting in my chair, he actually quit his day job at one point. When he first started doing this, what was it, 4 years ago or something, he was working at a Pizza Hut. He pretty much quit his day job and said, I think this Kindle thing is going to be big. And he started writing books about half-orcs. And now he is making a whole lot of, probably more than all of us combined.
Yeah. He did mention that he'd sold 300,000 copies of his book.
Okay. It was quite a few, and again, those ebook royalty rates are fantastic, and he's also moving on to some bigger and better things that news will be coming out about if it isn't out already. So that there's that too. Some people just say I'm going to do this, I'm going to be indie, and they write a lot of books. I mean, if you go to Amazon, you look up David Dalglish. I mean, I can't even count as high as the number of books that he has on that site. When I went to college, I placed out of math. I didn't even have to take any math. I can't even count that high and count all David's books and series. Like it's a huge number. So you see why he's successful. He's made that Herculean effort, which you can do, in any field, whether you're traditional, media, indie, or whatever. So yeah, there is money to be made if you commit yourself to it and you're smart about it.
Absolutely. Joshua, do you have any final thoughts?
I do not make money.
Diana?
Keep track of your money. Keep track of how much you're making, what your expenses are. Keep track of your taxes. Hire an accountant if need be, but keep track of your money. Be careful with it. And don't think that just because you have one good year, you can spend a lot of money and quit your job, because you might not have another good year.
All right, my final piece of advice is produce. You can only make money off things that you've produced, final finished products. Have a lot of stuff out there that you're making money from, produce a lot of things. Like Moses said, make that Herculean effort, and it will pay off for you. So, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week for another episode of Hide and Create.
This has been another episode of Hide and Create. The show is produced by me, Jordan Ellinger. The site is edited by Joshua Essoe, and your co-hosts have been Diana Rowland and Moses Siregar. That music that you're listening to was written by Jason Donnelly. We can be reached at writingpodcastonline.com, where you can ask us questions and suggest topics for future shows. Thank you for listening. Now go hide and create something.